record the session. Right. So firstly, I would like to introduce the agenda for you. So we are starting with Professor Sophie Palsmaker from Tampere University, and she is talking about the purpose of design. So how the beauty can guide us to sustainability, and also how we can design and with help of design to guide occupants to live and work in a sustainable way. Our second speaker is the postdoctoral researcher and Chief Strategy Officer Ken Dooley, who is working both in Aalto University and in Haltian. And his speech is about hyperlocal setting and services, and what that is, so that we hear more in Ken's presentation. And then we have the wonderful presentation about from City of Espoo about human factor in sustainable city planning. And as said, so Elina Vanne is presenting the ideas from City of Espoo, and Espoo is also one of the lighthouse cities in SPARCS European project. Right. So now we can start with our first presenter, so Professor Sophie Palsmaker from Tampere University. So please, the floor is yours.
Just checking, sharing now. It's a little strange. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see clearly.
Okay, great. And if I move them, that works as well.
The slides are not moving now.
Not at all. Do you see the content?
No, it's moving.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. Always good to check in the beginning. It's happened before. I keep talking and then actually nothing happened. So yes, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here today. So as Mimo said, I'll be talking about the purpose of design, and most of the talk will be about how design can basically support or hinder occupants to live and work in a sustainable way. And then I'll finish on a note about beauty and to sustainability as well. And so I've structured the talk in accordance with sort of 5 main infrastructures, and how that I see that the design of those infrastructures can influence sustainable behavior. And so I start with urban infrastructure, the bigger scale, then the physical infrastructure, energy and organizational infrastructure, and then a few things about social infrastructure as well. And then I will briefly summarize about the impacts also on the health infrastructure of all of these design components, and finish on the importance of the light and beauty in design. So, because time's very limited, I'm going to kick off immediately with the urban infrastructure. And as I think most of you are probably aware, good urban infrastructure can positively influence human behavior. And you can see some images here at the bottom. But it's really about if we design an urban environment in such a way that we can actually reduce car reliance because we've got good public transport, walking and cycling connectivity. We can provide opportunities for sharing, whether that's sharing of spaces or sharing of bikes and car sharing, and we see more and more of that in cities as well. And of course, we can also in our design include other facilities nearby that can be easily reached. And what we shouldn't forget as well is that design connectivity to urban green space and leisure spaces is really important to also support well-being, and it encourages these kind of more sustainable lifestyles. So in a way, a lot of this is obvious, because if we don't provide these things in cities, citizens cannot simply use it. And this is why we start to sort of often refer to it as nudge design or nudge architecture. Because of course we cannot force citizens to use these facilities, like you can see here in Copenhagen at the university. These sort of they're actually by Kobe architects. It can take 2,000 bike spaces, but it's also a retention basin for local flooding. But you know, we cannot obviously force citizens to use these spaces unless we then actually provide it at the least and make these attractive and easy to use. And of course, it's not just new infrastructure that we need to provide. We also need the transformation of existing cities as well to encourage, to encourage more sustainable lifestyles. So for example, Barcelona superblocks, which I'm sure most of you are familiar, that at the moment motorized transport is allowed all the way through around each of these sort of city blocks. And they've started to test a superblock model whereby there is 9 kind of blocks grouped together, and only along the perimeter can you then have this motorized transport, which then leaves the spaces and the streets within that 9 parameter block, as you can see here on the right in green, open them for these leisure spaces, these kind of what we call also social infrastructures, whereby people can have opportunities to meet, walk, cycle, and so on. And so the benefit is less resource use, less pollution, less noise, and as I said, opportunities for social infrastructure, which encourages more sustainable behavior and also leads to healthier residents. At the moment, because of the pandemic, we've started again this renewed discussion about the 15-minute city concept. And the idea is really that within 15 to 20 minutes from someone's home, people can cycle or by foot reach everything that they need. So everything's nearby the home. It also helps provide, again, that social infrastructure, but I'll come back to that. And of course, it doesn't mean that you work that closely to home, but it is about maybe there's a station within 15 or 20 minutes walk or a bus stop that then brings you to your work environment. Now, a brief note of caution is that there is a little bit of a danger that this sort of 15-minute city idea is used by developers to then overly densify the cities, because then they can build more on a plot, so it's got huge economic gains for them. And of course, that always has to be balanced with then housing that supports that density, and also all of these other functions and facilities as well. So we need these green urban spaces, those transport connectivities and so on as well, not just only housing densification. And as we all know as well, a well-designed urban environment makes it easier for architects to also optimize the creation of low-energy developments. And I think we cannot stress that enough, that if we have a good urban plan, it makes the job of then the building designers so much easier to actually plug into that sustainable urban plan to create buildings that perform better. And therefore, of course, in turn, it makes it easier for occupants to live sustainably as the physical infrastructure supports it. An example is that a good urban plan can create a pleasant microclimate, so reduced urban canyons and wind flows, and it can minimize heat island effect. And one way of doing that is this, as you can see on that image, these urban breaks with the stepping up and down of different stories, so that you can draw the sun into the spaces behind and also onto the facades and into the spaces, the living spaces within. And this is really important, of course. And of course, at the less the higher energy efficient the buildings are, also that supports then the actual energy use. And an example of that is here, when I move now to the physical infrastructure, is that that good building design can support occupants to live sustainably and make it easy for them without thinking. And a very good example, as I said, is high fabric efficiency standards, because they're really robust to different user behaviors. And I've no idea if you can see me move the mouse when I point at this graph, but it's by Jenny Love. She's from her PhD at UCL, where she still is now, in London. And it shows you on the left a very well insulated building, on the right of the graph a very badly insulated building, and on the vertical axis energy used for space heating. And what she found, particularly in retrofitted dwellings, that if they were insulated to a higher standard, so the left side of the graph, it almost didn't matter. It did, because you can see the blue and the green and the red, but it almost didn't matter. There was only small differences between residents who had sort of a very high or a very low heating behavior, because the building actually was so robust to these different behaviors of heating of the residents, compared to then on the right, when you have a very badly insulated building, when people, for example, heat more rooms or to higher temperatures, that had a significant impact on the energy use. So clearly occupants use energy in the building to be comfortable, but comfort is affected by the building fabric and how we design it. And so we clearly need to create well-insulated buildings, and in Finland we're very good at that. And that's also, of course, because we can control the building fabric, but we cannot control and wouldn't want to control the residents' behavior, because again, it's about that notch design and that notch architecture that we support and try to provide comfort through well-performing buildings. An example of that is here, you can see in Germany, a passive house building, and the passive house standard performs really well in its fabric. You can see here the design with very small windows on the north, so it reduces heat loss, so it really reflects the orientations and then really faces towards south to get that solar, free solar gain in. And of course the idea is around people that are only needed to heat a building, but in reality you still would need a small heating system. We do, of course, need to be very careful with this, because while we're then designing for winter periods, it can also overheat in summer if we don't provide solar shading, and particularly these upper floor units are probably at risk. The lower ones have got fairly good protection from the balconies, the solar shading. But it's really about making sure that the residents are thermally comfortable, so not too hot, not too cold. If they are too hot in heat waves because we haven't provided solar shading, we will risk that they will purchase air conditioning. And so it links again back to good building design, how residents will behave. Another example is that of a shallow dwelling plan of the physical infrastructure and the design that really impacts sustainable lifestyles. And that's because, of course, if we have a shallow dwelling plan, so less than 6 meters deep in housing, it enables good daylighting, it reduces the need for artificial light and associated energy use. It supports more adaptable plan layouts so that residents can stay when life situations change. So it also means that they invest in the community. Again, comes back to this social infrastructure as well. And also a shallow plan means there's less risk of summertime overheating, so it's easier to ventilate. Just very, very briefly, when I said 6 meters depth, that's really if it's one-sided windows. If it's two-sided, it can be more or less twice that depth. And when we combine a shallow plan with better connections to outdoor spaces and greenery, so visual and physical connections, shallow plan also supports occupant health and well-being. So it reduces also this pressure on health infrastructures. And I briefly want to show you the example of a deep plan. This is work by my colleague Sini Sarima, and at the bottom you can see a link to a free accessible journal article published earlier last year. And it really highlights her work, the connection of the city scale, so the urban infrastructure on building depth and apartment depth, so that's in the physical infrastructure. And in the dotted line on this image, you actually see the city plan extension of the buildable area where the developer is allowed to build. And you can also see that that really determines that the developer tends to take up the entire block of that area. Here's a little bit less. And that then creates these rather deep plan units. And I'll just go through this in a little bit more detail, because this is actually, unfortunately, a little bit typical of a problem in today's Finnish housing stock. So first of all, there's far too many units that are too small. So 6 of 9 are 1 or 2 room apartments. And units typically have only one window on one side, so they're single aspects, so they only face one direction, apart from those here on the corner, these 4. And as I said, the units are deep plan and they're single-sided, so they actually have really quite bad daylight, and they're often 8 or 9 meters deep, so everything in the back, you don't get actually very good daylighting. And as a result, they're also really inadaptable. So Sini made then this improved design to make them better, so that we have the sustainable lifestyles, because if it's good daylighting, you don't have to switch the lights on so much and so on. And it actually means, as you can see, it means that we need to go from a redesign from a fat block to a slim block. It means that we have 3 instead of, and I don't know if you can see me pointing at it, but 3 stair cores instead of 1 lift and stair core. But it also means that we create a lot of dual aspect units, so they have daylight and solar gain from both sides. And also we can create these L-shaped plans so that actually we still have dual aspect, and we also create increased adaptability as well. So you might be wondering, yeah, but how is that going to actually sit on the city plan again? On the left, it was as before. The dotted line is still showing what it was before. But you can see that the same number of units with the same square meterages still fit on that same site. And instead of this fat block, the slim block is much more sustainable and encourages more sustainable behavior. So as I said, it gives you better solar gain, better daylight, better quality of living, and adaptable, so people are more invested in the community, don't need to switch the lights on, don't need as much heating energy use as well. Also, having fewer stair cores means that fewer people use the same stair cores. It also can actually really help with the social infrastructure, getting to know one's neighbor. So this really highlights this connection between the urban and the physical infrastructure and the ability how we can support or hinder sustainable behaviors and lifestyles through design. Yes, it probably is going to be slightly more costly doing this slim block, but I also think we need to ask ourselves the question, what is the cost of not building better? And we're very keen actually to look with other stakeholders to try to quantify that cost, not just the capital cost, but whole life costing and health and well-being aspects as well. We obviously need to be careful related to physical infrastructure. We need to be careful that we don't trade off this issue of this fat block, its compact form, less heat loss, it's more energy efficient, but then actually on the other hand, we lose opportunities for daylight and compromise well-being. And often also developers use the excuse of these fat blocks and ever smaller units that they're more ecological and they can then build at higher densities for more profit, and we then get these reduced opportunities for sustainable living because density alone is not enough. And we also have to be careful that we don't try to change occupant behavior and blame the occupants for high energy use, because it only makes sense if actually, basically the building and the urban environment have actually such a huge impact on resident behavior and is really responsible for unsustainable consumption rather than actually the occupants. And that's, of course, why we should also undertake post-occupancy and building performance evaluation to understand what the actual performance is really like. And an example of that could be this one about energy infrastructure. This is a block, as you can see, with 3 micro wind turbines at the very top. This is in London, fairly centrally located. And we can really, if we forget about human factors, get actually quite disastrous design decisions. And so this was quite expensive, almost 1.5 million euros, and it would only supply 8% of the predicted energy needs. I never saw it turn while I lived in London for over a decade when it was there. And that's because the residents complained about noise and vibrations, and it was a problem when they were there during the evening and sleeping. So it was then switched off at night, which meant that not a lot, if any, electricity was ever produced. But at the same time, we should also not blame the residents, because actually it's the design issues that are to blame. We know that actually it's very rare that these micro wind turbines work in most urban areas because the wind speeds are too low and inconsistent, and they were probably never suitable to begin with. And that also brings me back to organizational infrastructure, because the way that the city and buildings are managed, they can really support and even enhance sustainable lifestyles or actually hinder it. So for example, again, it can be easy to recycle with clear collection points and times. We can support food growing and composting if we have appropriate facilities and make it easy to use, also easy to use and look after building services so that it's easy to clean ventilation filters and so on. And so the key is that we involve stakeholders before and after, that we understand and act on what they want and need, including not just the users, the occupants, but also facilities managers. We need easy to use controls, very easy to use and understand user manuals as well. And of course, every time we get new tenants, whether they're in a commercial building or in housing, we actually should ease them in and create a soft landing so we can recommission systems to suit their lifestyle or working practices and needs. And again, undertaking POE and BPE. An example of the impact of organizational infrastructure on occupant behavior is that of Loxford School in the UK by AHR Architects. And we have many more of these examples in our book. Judith Kimpian is the main lead author. It's called Energy People Buildings, Making Sustainable Architecture Work, and is currently at the printers and due out. And this is just one example that I briefly wanted to talk you through, how revealing sometimes the building design and then also the organizational structure can influence the actual sustainable behaviors. So as you can see, this is a courtyard, and there is these fire doors that open into a large foyer area and onto the courtyard. But if people on the other side wanted to get to the foyer, it was much easier to go through the courtyard rather than all the way around the building. But because the doors from the outside couldn't be opened, people started to put things in between to keep the doors open. And as a result, it meant that there was a lot of cold air and heat loss occurring. People were then cold in the foyer, so they put the heating up in the foyer, which of course increases the energy cost and the energy use. Then as you can imagine, this was a low energy building. It had a ground source heat pump, but then the demand temperature was too high for the ground source heat pump to deliver the heat, which meant that fossil fuel boilers would kick in instead. So the CO2 emissions were never achieved. Now, how did they find out about this? Because they undertook this post-occupancy and building performance evaluation, they could see that the ground source heat pump wasn't actually kicking in, that there was much higher energy cost, and they could then trace back through post-occupancy evaluation and how people used the building, what might actually cause that. So the facilities managers, when they figured out with the architects and engineers what happened, they were then informed about this, and very easily they put a latch on the door, and actually now the door can be opened from the outside. So you can see very simple organizational things and best intentions in design are very much connected and actually support or actually hinder this sustainable behavior. Very briefly, another example is that of, you can see here in EcoViki, that they also found that energy use was much higher than expected. So the idea is also that by going back, we can realize that sustainability isn't just achieved on paper, it has to be in reality. And when we go back and check how things perform, we can then fix things, learn from them. And of course, it's not just about energy and carbon, but also user satisfaction, indoor environmental quality, and these human factors as well. And that brings me to social infrastructure. And it's really about spaces and places that can support community encounters. So it's about food growing areas in the community, lively pedestrian streets, well-maintained parks. It can also be community spaces at urban and building scales. So it's all about supporting residents to come together if they want to. And it also reduces isolation, and we've seen that that's particularly important for people who live alone and the elderly now in the pandemic. And Kleinenberg's research already 20 or 30 years ago showed that the characteristics of the built environment are of considerable importance to human health and well-being, and can even reduce mortality. An example here is by Helen and Hard Architects in Norway, Vint Molebakke co-housing, and it was collaboratively developed with the residents. And you can see the provision here of a dining kitchen area and also shared space as well. And I did briefly want to point out that all of these issues that we just talked about, the urban, the physical, the organizational, the social infrastructure, and the energy infrastructures all have an impact not only on sustainable lifestyles, but it also impacts health infrastructures. And we also have to remember that good health and well-being is not just the absence of disease, but it's also about social justice issues and an equitable carbon neutral transition as well. And these inequalities exacerbate health impacts in society, and our designs can support or hinder that. And we've seen that, for example, in London, the UK and US, whereby overcrowding has led to higher incidences of COVID-19 infections and death, even in particularly overcrowded conditions. We don't have numbers for Finland, but we know that there's also 20% of people living in overcrowded conditions. And so some of my final slides. Good health and well-being is not just the absence of disease, but it's also about comfort and flourishing and the state of happiness. And I want to end with two Lance Hosey quotes. Aesthetic attraction is not a superficial concern. It's an environmental imperative. Beauty could save the planet. And it's really about this importance of flourishing, of delight and beauty and well-being. And it's based on the premise that what we love is what lasts and what we will look after. And the final quote is, imagine a day when we've perfectly solved the challenges of energy, resources and emissions, and everything we do and make is clean, harmless and infinitely renewable. Is that enough? Thank you. So quite a lot to go through. Sorry to whiz through that, but I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Sophie. I mean, that was really impressive, and it certainly gave us a lot of ideas to think about that where we need to develop our urban environments. There is one, actually few questions already in the chat. Kari is asking about the kind of like the walking and cars and bicycling. How about those people who have disabilities and cannot maybe walk or use the public transport? So what we do with that kind of like mixed solution? So what is the best one to do, thinking about that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a very good question. It's the same also within the buildings, that if we provide these community spaces, they have to, of course, be accessible. And that's also why I refer to the social infrastructure, because it's about equity and equality of these spaces and accessibility to them. And it's not just even people with disabilities, it could even be people that come from different backgrounds, like myself, migrants, that feel that the space isn't accessible to them because they're different than others who use the space, even if they're able-bodied. So it's actually about, I think, very much linked to this 15-minute city, that it's very locally available, that actually that there is a community that look after each other, and that they're also accessibly available, so that it is actually spaces that are streets and sidewalks that are wide enough, that actually are easily accessible, and it isn't so focused on motorized transportation. And making this, and usually what we see is spaces that are well designed for universal use for everybody. That means that we also benefit from it, mothers with prams and kids, elderly people that can still walk but are a bit slower. You know, it's actually a benefit to all of us when we design these spaces.
Thank you. And really good answer, and actually shows really the co-benefits to taking into account everyone. Yes.
Yeah, we all benefit, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Pekka Huovinen, I can see that you are commenting 2 points in the chat, but I cannot read them. Could you put your mic on and comment those? Because somehow the background is in a way that I cannot read it.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mimo. So I had some trouble to copy my text. So I was just aligning with Kari with these things, that in the future, being also having a multiple education areas, like also urban and regional planning as a major from Aalto University or TKK. So I learned also that in the future we have something mobile, private mobile something. It might be today cars, but it might be something else. And then we can combine it with public transportation of something. So I wouldn't talk about minimizing using of cars. That's like something coming from the 90s or 2000s. That's my first comment.
Okay, hi Pekka. Controversial perhaps. I actually disagree with you. I actually never learned to drive. I never had to, because I lived in the city, didn't need it, and it actually excludes quite a lot of people. Of course, there is a self-driving cars and so on, but at the moment we don't have good alternatives still for the fuel, the affordability. So there's also, it's not just accessibility, but like physical accessibility, but also actually affordability. You know, there's fuel transport, poverty as well, access to these motorized forms. And if we end up creating our cities based on that, we still exclude based on socioeconomic factors, not just physical factors and so on. And I think we also have to keep that in mind as well. So, but of course you're right, we cannot foresee what will happen, and these things are changing very fast, with also the self-driving cars, and also people with disabilities that can get motorized and robotic kind of support. But when we then look at social infrastructure, this is not how we're going to actually support the community when people are just whizzing around in their own things. And it again comes down, as I said, to there's embodied energy associated, there's social infrastructure issues around it, and also actually socioeconomic equality that we risk losing sight of.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, maybe you don't know the reality in Finland with 1,500 kilometers of length. So well, I would like to see your principles to be applied there. 1,000 kilometers from Helsinki, where I was also having my pilot objects that we had to learn to take into account. You don't live here only in big cities.
No, but I'm talking the talk that I've given. I'm talking actually within the city. So I totally agree that when you go move between cities and regional connections, then of course where you cannot walk and cycle. You know, I totally with you. You could, but yeah, I'm talking within cities. Yes, absolutely. Just to clarify. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. There is a lot of discussion also in the chat, but unfortunately we need to go forward with the program. So thank you once more, Sophie. Thank you. And our next speaker is Ken Dooley, and he is talking about hyperlocal citizens and how the convenience is the biggest driver of change. So the floor is yours, Ken.
Thanks, Mimo. Can you see my screen?
Yes, very good.
Okay, great. So actually, I'm going to really build on what Sophie has been talking about, and we're going to look at some of the trends we've seen again in cities, but hopefully some of these things are more applicable to kind of smaller villages around Finland and around Europe. And this is something that we've been kind of looking at in Aalto. I'm going to set my timer. Looking at in Aalto maybe for most of last year, and then we've just started a research project in January this year. And then just really quickly then, because I've just changed job recently, I'm now working for Empathic Building, based compared to my old history in Granlund, where we're kind of working on software as a user interface for buildings. This is the software that's been bought by Haltien from Tieto. So then we're really working on getting people back into offices and seeing CO2 in meeting rooms, and helping people really understand what workplaces and universities kind of need to have in the future. But enough about the day job then. So one thing that we're kind of looking at is this thing in the built environment and in city lives and in daily lives, which is convenience is kind of taking over so many things. I'll show examples of that in a moment. And we're looking at services and monitoring services moving closer to citizens and kind of weighing up, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And kind of looking now that it's even more relevant that people are spending more time in their neighborhoods due to COVID-19. And again, this connects to the 15-minute city, or even some guys in Sweden that I know have been working on the 1-minute city. And then really looking at, is this a positive thing? What are the negative or positive benefits on this? And from our kind of technology focus in the smart building side, we're kind of looking at, this has been really enabled by online payment and reservation systems, really enabled by looking at the empty and available city spaces and turning them into some kind of reusable platform, some kind of space that is open to other people to use, and really looking at the kind of smart locks and security cameras and the accessibility. Sometimes sharing economy is actually called the access economy, and hence these layers are now are really important, but also have become much less expensive over the years and make these things realistic. And a really kind of overview we've used internally to kind of show what we're talking about then is we're looking at the drivers of really being convenience, which is kind of leading to local services. We'll show what that means. Then looking at these, essentially the platforms are just spaces, kind of plug and play spaces. We have some different types. We're then looking at them enabled by smart technology. And we really think that Finland is a global leader in this kind of area at the moment. And we'll show some really clear examples of what's come and why maybe in this context. And then we really think there's a real benefit to these kind of things. And I'll show that in a moment. So just from an overview then, where some of this is coming from. Actually, I interviewed for a kind of parallel project, Vera Vihula from Espoo last year, to talk about their city as a service project, which really talks about having a diversity of services, which talks about kind of really focusing on sustainability and well-being, which is something that this really connects to. And then really looking at kind of reconsidering the service offering, understanding service paths, which means if I drop the kids off to daycare this morning, what is my kind of path then on the way to work, or looking at kind of as we move around the city and seeing the patterns that people repeatedly have. And then they're really interested in kind of stepping back and almost outsourcing the services, but then overseeing them so they're inclusive and affordable and available to everyone. And one of the kind of nicest, most kind of almost kind of modern or open-minded way is kind of looking at some of the things that have happened around schools and saying a school is not a building, it's a collection of services. And they could be offered in a variety of different environments over a neighborhood. And some of the cases where this has been almost forced to happen because of mold in some schools, the feedback from the students has been really popular. So this school is a service model where some Espoo students are studying in Otaniemi, then is a really good case. But the open-mindedness of saying we need to teach people, let's build a school and teach people there, and seeing, hey, we need to teach people, teach students and teach kids. Let's see where they could learn in our environment, and let's just focus on that education, not where it is. And that creates kind of really opens things up. And then as we've been studying this, the European Union has kind of launched the new European Bauhaus, which really connects to some of our thinking, talking about beautiful and inclusive and accessible spaces. This has just been launched in January, talking about beautiful means sustainable, and then talking about enriching experiences. And I guess this is where the kind of convenience comes in a little bit, and I'll show in a moment. And also some of our most interesting, let's say, examples or pilots we're looking at really talk about sharing and about reducing the kind of material dimension, which is materialistic behavior of owning lots of things and actually being more open and kind of sharing things. So some of the kind of things that really are kind of interesting about this really is the idea that looking at health and well-being like ESPO, where we're looking at services that can kind of be really close to home. And I'll show on a map the kind of distances we're talking about. But essentially it talks about leaving your house and kind of walking more often. It talks about the health benefits of exercise with that, the climate benefits of not always getting into your car to do everything. I have a background in energy efficiency and climate change kind of research and consulting. And I even find myself kind of having to tell myself to not get into the car to go to a store that's a kilometer away or something like that. There's then the community benefits of actually bumping into your neighborhoods of, sometimes we call this, designing for serendipity, of getting out of your car, of actually walking to places rather than being stuck in this car. There's a documentary on ULE at the moment that was shown in January called The Great Disconnect that really kind of emphasizes these things. And also with regards to all the elements of COVID-19, we're in our neighborhoods more, but maybe if more services are in our neighborhood, we'll talk about co-working in a moment, that actually we're not kind of moving around the city all the time and we're not kind of spreading viruses, if this is a future we need to be aware of. So I'm going to kind of give some really quick, a bit like Sophie said, a really quick overview of these things, and hopefully it kind of inspires people or kind of makes them think about what we're talking about. The wider trends around convenience is, things like food delivery, things like Volt. I had some friends when Volt wasn't working a few weeks ago because of the snow, kind of, thought a human right had been taken away. So we're seeing services that we didn't expect before become really popular, become a part of daily life, or weekly life in this case. We're seeing trends like Amazon Go, and even articles where there's now a blurring line between retail and vending machines, and I'll show why that's relevant in a moment. I'm a real fan of donut economics. I was really impressed by the book when I read it last year, and actually some of the core tenets here are, sharing things and making them not just a consumer product, but having a really well-designed product that is potentially circular or isn't fast fashion type of everything. And then the ability for having really good products and then opening them up to be shared and opening that access, that distribution element is a really important part of Kate Raworth's donut economics. In a perfect world, this would be layer 1 and 2. And a perfect world, the kind of products would be built in Finland and built with finished materials. But we think we start here. And there's been some really good work done by Kalasatama Helsinki looking at these kind of spaces. Maybe they're the forerunners for the scale that we're now talking about, and talking about shared spaces boost network effect, and talking about the importance of collaboration, and really talking about using these empty spaces by putting a smart lock on top of them. And then at the same time, we talk about in this project pop-up a lot. But we know the things that we're maybe going to show aren't so new in their entirety. We've always had a kind of tori environment where there's a market where someone turns up in the morning and sells their produce and takes the store down in that evening. We've had, vaccinations recently coming to universities and office buildings where people don't individually go for the flu shot to the health center. The nurses come to them, and we've had people working from coffee shops or staffless gyms. But we really see this accelerating, and we really see it being driven about kind of getting out of your house on foot and having some services nearby. And then just to talk about Finland for a moment and why we think it's a kind of special space at the moment. Last year, there was this European Union Digital Economy and Society Index about, you know, the usability and the availability of digital public services and apps. Finland kind of topped this. And then maybe a week or two ago, I saw, for example, Forum Videum tweeting about, you know, Helsinki being a really high-ranked smart city and Finland being a really innovative country. That's a reason why the things that we're kind of seeing locally, we think are special on a global scale. And there's some really cool examples that I'll show. And then our kind of concept then is kind of looking at these kind of city spaces where I live in East Helsinki. I live somewhere here between Marjaniemi and Roihuvuori. And we've kind of put let's say, services based on, let's say, grocery stores as being a kind of center point of a neighborhood. The orange ones are Kesko, the blue ones are Asryma, and maybe the black ones are Lidl. And really understanding these, and actually you can see the kind of metro line here. If you leave Roihuvuori out, it's the metro line. And there's maybe a 1 kilometer, there's a 2 kilometer basic kind of line between these. And we're really interested, and I'll show the staffless grocery store concept. We're really interested in these kind of spaces. And these aren't very dense neighborhoods. They're kind of suburban neighborhoods, but it's about, and this is an illustrative drawing drawn by me on PowerPoint to get a feeling for the distances. But they're not maybe 2 kilometers away. We'd still take a bus, but they're about these kind of neighborhood services that can be dropped into an urban neighborhood. This is a pretty low rise, kind of 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5-story apartment buildings, some single family homes around here. So pretty dense, but not super dense, and the kind of role that these kind of spaces can have. So from our point of view then, there's these kind of different, that I'll show examples of. We have these micro service points, which are kind of a smaller version of a normal service. They're driven by kind of low labor costs because they've almost been automated. And they're available almost 24/7, which again is this kind of convenience element. The shared public services is a kind of niche service that's too small for that area. They have a pop-up model. And then there's these shared non-public services that are kind of closed off to the community, aren't inclusive, but are really interesting in this trend. And maybe they promote sharing behavior, but I'll show examples. And then the kind of things we're talking about that I'll show are kind of staffless grocery. There's a couple of different companies in Finland, kind of micro co-working. In the non-public space, we have kind of apartments doing really interesting things. There's 2 really interesting examples of apartment companies selling apartment buildings by having lots of different services in them, really servitized living. And then for us, we're looking at kind of food delivery and libraries and pop-up bike maintenance for these kind of city spaces. So I think one of the best examples is this idea which opened last year called Korttelikauppa. Opened in the summer last year. It's a staffless grocery store. The trend behind this is that maybe we're starting to get food delivered on a kind of weekly basis. And the trend then is if you're getting food delivered once a week, or hey, we have 3 kids under 10, so we get a massive delivery delivered once a week. But then you find yourself saying, hey, I'd like to buy this, or I forgot to buy this. And then you're popping to a store to buy a lot less maybe. And the idea then is that the idea of convenience then is really close to home. The idea of convenience is 24/7. And there's a real positive thing with getting out of your house and walking to these spaces. And then we're really thinking about what are the minimum viable product, or what are the typical patterns that we'd have if there's a grocery store in these in-between spaces. Then maybe there's some other things as well, which I'll show. And they have this kind of automated process where you show your card and it lets you in and you pick up groceries and you leave, very like Amazon Go, but in Finland, started by some Aalto ex-doctoral students. And actually they opened in Helsinki last year in the summer. I think it was June last year. So we're talking kind of 6, 7, 8 months ago. And now they already have 4 stores. So kind of the trend really growing, and really saying that if these are a trend, and they're popping into this because they're not competing with the typical grocery stores at the center of a neighborhood. They're kind of in the gaps. They're in kind of interstitial areas. So then what else could be put in these areas? Is there I'll show, for example, in a moment, a kind of staffless co-working space where you can't work from home and you want the social element, and there's a kind of community-led 10 people or 15 people rent a space and they kind of work for there, or is it going to be more kind of commercialized, like within a really small way, like we have here in East Helsinki? I'll run through these examples because I want to give a feeling of everything. What's interesting as well is Stora Enso are powering these stores with their selfly store solution. And at the same time, Stora Enso are involved. Neste have opened up these easy deli, beautiful 24-hour stores in their petrol stations, gas stations. So we're kind of really seeing this kind of grow. And at the same time, in these kind of microservices, I'm in East Helsinki, where I am. We have, for example, Mesta nearby at the metro station Herttoniemi, really kind of community co-working, really kind of cozy feel, and really kind of it's hosted during the daytime, but it's very much a kind of staffless concept. You let your phone in and you book online and you reserve a desk for yourself. So these kind of micro services then mean that they don't need to be 2 or 3 kilometers away and in these core, maybe metro station kind of areas in Helsinki, or urban central points where there's a shopping center or something where people gather, or really good kind of suburban villages. They actually could be dropped around, and it could be the kind of place that we walk to, that we leave our car behind, that we meet people in our neighborhood. And they're really interesting from that point of view. We're still scanning these kind of examples. I know this popped up, if anyone saw it a week or 2 ago, and Kauniainen were like I don't know if this is a kind of micro service. I don't know if this is a hyper local service, but putting in your bank card and typing in some buttons and getting a pizza in 3 minutes is just another example of this convenience element. There's not a surprise that 3 minutes there is kind of written as a really important thing to this service. But we're really looking at harnessing these trends and kind of really looking at the kind of positive benefits of them. Convenience is something in my kind of business that it just seems to be the kind of magic word that we can't, from example, a sustainability point of view, tell people to give up their car. From a mobility as a service point of view, if you think of Wimap, but if you make the experience really nice to use and really easy to use, and you make the experience attractive, then maybe we have more of a chance of kind of encouraging sustainable lifestyles. So hence convenience in the carrot or the stick approach. I guess it could be considered the carrot approach with these kind of things. Kind of looking at these as well, shared public spaces, I think of Yepli. So now we have people like Yepli or Nice Bike, or the bike companies near me in East Helsinki do this as well. Kind of saying on social media, maybe it's the Madiniemi or Roivodi Facebook group, we're going to be at this corner next week, bring us your bike. And really the services are kind of coming to neighborhoods. There's a point where every couple of weeks there will be a bike maintenance person 500 meters from my house, or less than a kilometer, and I can bring the family's bikes to them, and it's kind of really convenient. And we're seeing this trend happening a lot. We're also seeing kind of libraries kind of renting out, becoming more flexible than just libraries, and some libraries turning 24/7, libraries renting out drills, and you can rent sports equipment from my local library. And we're also seeing something really interesting, which is kind of a hybrid food delivery concept from Prisma. So they're kind of delivering food to local kind of gas stations that they also co-own ABC, and turning gas station kind of off, retail spaces into delivery points, and kind of bringing, okay, not everyone can afford food delivery, but Prisma mightn't have a hypermarket in your area, and it's expensive to bring it to your area. So they'll dramatically reduce costs by having like a pickup point by just dropping a pickup point into the environment. So these are kind of really interesting trends. And then the non-inclusive maybe cases are maybe things like Tripla, which has all kinds of services downstairs, like meeting spaces or yoga spaces, or gyms in the apartment buildings that UIT are selling in Tripla. Or they even have a tavaralainamo, a kind of rental area for equipment, and all these kind of things. We see Asarve and Reddy talking about, we won't just enable food delivery, we'll enable someone to stock your fridge for you and walk your dogs for you. So these kind of things are really kind of happening all the time. And for us, it's just really interesting then to kind of see what's happening. It might be with regards to deliveries or staffless rental, these kind of things, where there's a rental hub for DIY tools. We have some examples in Finland already, but they're maybe criticized for kind of not being easy enough to use and not being, let's say, kind of really convenient. And then looking at kind of curated pop-ups, which kind of means that maybe the housing company invites people in to change tires at that time of the year, or ad hoc pop-up, or even kind of looking at these kind of pickup for peer-to-peer sales, where people are selling something on Tori, and there's like a smart post example in the neighborhood. The delivery hub can also enable these kind of things. So that's my kind of time up. There's a lot of information there. I hope you get a flavor of what we're talking about. We're really interested in this kind of human-powered transport local to home. And we're looking at kind of doing 1 or 2 small pilots in Q1 or Q2, maybe based around micro co-working, maybe based around things like this, around the item sharing that we see as a big trend, and maybe being able to drop these kind of services in a local neighborhood, being almost a vending machine. And again, that's to cut costs, so we can offer it in a tiny neighborhood, is a kind of really interesting concept. Okay, thank you, Mimu, for the opportunity to present this.
Thank you, Ken. Really fascinating, and you showed so many examples and so many kind of like possibilities what we have already. How about, I mean, your first impression that is it easy to attract those new services, or how you create those? I mean, you showed really nice example, but how you kind of like the service providers, so how you attract them to this network?
Yeah, so I really think it's about understanding the gaps in the neighborhood, and is there these commercial spaces? And you know, people have been long complaining that the master plan is putting these commercial spaces in a neighborhood and wanting a cafe culture, but actually no one ever uses them. And then we have these kind of kerhohuone community spaces in apartment buildings. So I think it's really interesting to say, to really enable these, and that if there is, I'm really interested from an Aalto perspective as well. If there is a really expensive, we have some new apartment buildings where I live, and there's a commercial space that might be for office or might be for retail. Are the owners of those spaces allowing much lower rent for these kind of services while they look for their long-term tenant? Or are they going to sit on these commercial space and say, it's this much, it's a new building, it's this much price per meter squared? These kind of community spaces could pop up and rent your space per month or for 2 months, or be there indefinitely until you get your long-term tenant, and then they'll gladly leave. But it's about offering that flexibility. And I think, especially for rental apartment building owners that are really attracting people, having those spaces near a foreign or near a rental apartments could be really interesting and attracting people. And it's just about really thinking about and opening up these empty spaces, and actually adding to the community. And I don't think we're as afraid of pop-up as we were in the past. I think people used to say in the past, in commercial real estate, it would cost me more with the lawyer's fees than it would to get the rent for 3 months. But you know, I think 5 years ago, Finlayson had a really raw kind of pop-up store in Forum. And that really changed for me, that, you know, we are becoming flexible. So anyone sitting on a commercial property that they've never thought of renting it out to a kind of service like this that would, you know, help the community or improve the community because of these factors, I'd really ask, we're looking to do some pilots in those spaces, so that's one thing, but I'd really ask them to be kind of more flexible. And, you know, we thought in the past that, or someone said in the past, the idea that if they could get a Starbucks in their Töölö, you know, corner of a neighborhood, that it actually raises the prices all around it. So is there an ability here where these services actually increase the value, or a city bike station in a neighborhood actually increases the value of the apartments or the buildings around it? I really want us to think about those things and kind of be flexible about those things.
Wonderful, wonderful. Hey, that's really nice approach also about the value of the kind of like the whole area. Hey, there is also one question about the culture. That is the culture also, like, is this dependent on the culture, or how you see that? Are these services more for the kind of like bigger cities, or how do you see maybe in the smaller cities, or in Finland compared to Sweden? And is there a difference?
I really don't think so. I think someone said, is there a bubble? I presented this once before and someone said, oh, this sounds too good to be true. There's a bubble around this. I think essentially what we're saying is that can we enable the services we use really regularly in a week? Can we enable them to be on the doorsteps of some neighborhoods? And I really think that the trends we're talking about is people, getting out of their house. I go for a walk. We had this fake commute concept where, you miss commuting, you miss the exercise from commuting to or from work. So you go for a walk in the afternoon. So if there's more remote working, then I think people definitely need or want to leave their house, wants to go for a walk and have that exercise and that fresh air and that daylight at this time of the year. And I think there's an imperative from a health perspective, there's an imperative from an environment perspective, and we're just kind of making that easier. So anywhere somebody wants to get out of their house and go for a 1 kilometer walk once a day, especially remote workers, then we're just tapping into that need. And now what we're pointing out is there's brilliant examples in Finland. The technology seems to have come to a point where it's kind of really enabling these things, either payments or advertisement on Facebook or social media, or the accessibility with smart locks. So it's just a really interesting time. And actually, we never intended to study this. There's just so many examples popped out that it kind of forced us to look at it. So it's been a really nice kind of, moment in time. And now Heikki Yasalo and Bismo Jahan and myself are studying these things.
Wonderful. Hey, there is still one more question we have time, that about the development of hyperlocal mobility services and booking a shared vehicle, for example, in the neighborhood or that. So do you have done any studies on that?
Yeah, so actually I spoke to Sampo, who's the CEO of Mass Global, and they really think there's going to be these neighborhood hub things. So you again have your 2 or 3 kilometers where there's a central metro station or a shopping or Ostokesko shopping center kind of thing. But in between then, we collect these mini services. So maybe it's a smart post delivery hub, maybe it's a micro co-working, maybe it's a staffless grocery store. At that same point, we have some city bikes, we have some car rentals for when we need them. So, and again, they are these kind of unmanned sharing economy services. I would love us to have one of these sharing hubs for, the items like the DIY tools and we have them at one point. And it's just really fun to kind of think, what will that service hub or that local hub look like, and what of the kind of different palette of options we have, which ones suit different neighborhoods and which ones grow. And I'm involved in the sharing economy kind of research community as well. And the sharing economy research community is afraid that we make these too expensive and too digital and they become a premium service. So we need to find the balance between a excellent digital service that's beautiful to use and intuitive and easy to use and can enable people to discover and have better sustainable behaviors. And so it's a brilliant service, but at the same time is inclusive and affordable. And that's the kind of challenge. And hopefully, hopefully we'll start seeing these things kind of come together quite soon. But in terms of Mass Global and the mobility as a service guys, they're already thinking about these mini hubs that you don't rent a car at the local shopping center, or it's more closer to the city bike infrastructure points.
Okay, thank you. So
Cool.
We are waiting more results for your research. So thanks a lot once more for your fascinating. Thank you. And now we have the pleasure to introduce Elina Vanne from the city of Espoo, and she is the sustainability leader in the Espoo and also the leader of the SPARCS Espoo pilot. So the floor is yours, Elina.
Thank you, Mimo. I'm both excited but also a bit nervous because these two presentations before me have been, I'm amazed. So many good ideas also that I can take to my own work in the SPARCS project. But now let's find my presentation and start with that. Okay, I assume that it's showing correctly to you.
Yes, it's fine.
I can no more see the Teams control panel. So please advise me if there is anything going on. So my name is Elina Vanne and I work as a development manager here at the city of Espoo. I work at the sustainable development team and we work in several topics. We have kind of divided our work into 4 main goals, which are circular economy, energy, mobility, and smart city. And actually, what I see after the presentations, the 2 presentations we have heard so far, it's really good now to kind of hear and let you hear the perspective, the aspect of the city, for example, like Espoo, the 2nd largest city in Finland. And I've been kind of listing the things that enable the sustainable city planning, and the human factor is one big part of it. But first kind of bullet point would be political support. Without the political support, our hands as city workers, civil servants are tied. Without ambitious goals and the political support, nothing can ever happen. And in Espoo, we have really found out that setting ambitious goals, for example, in sustainability, is really the key to make things happen. Also to gain good partnerships, gain good collaboration that is needed to make these things happen. The most sustainable city in Europe, now and in the future, that's the topic of our strategy, the Espoo story. And that is always kind of guiding us. That's where we want to go. And that is also, of course, supporting the work of the sustainable development team itself. But of course, the whole city is working towards this goal. In our strategy, we have also set some clear goals regarding sustainable city development. And for example, the area of Kera that I will talk to you a bit later about is a good example that is actually something that you can put in the strategy. That's how you can really inform everyone involved that yes, we have these kind of ambitious goals regarding this specific area or a specific theme. To support the city strategy, we have set up 4 cross-administrative development programs. And from this, there is currently 4 of them. The current city council term is coming to an end soon. There will be election this spring, and then we will have a new strategy, new political ambitious people supporting our work. But from these 4 program names, I can right away say that it's the participatory Espoo and the sustainable Espoo programs that are mostly supporting the sustainable city development itself. The participatory Espoo really was important to create models for citizen engagement in the city, but also kind of outline what is it that we really want to have, how we want to engage with our citizens. And the results from the period that is now coming to an end, the city council term and the term of the program, the results are really good because we have the model, we have also kind of handbook for citizen engagement, but also we have created this kind of cornerstones of the citizen engagement in Espoo. And from this you can see the kind of the big picture there is it's not just talking about the citizens, it is also talking about different stakeholders, but it's also talking about the different roles that the people have. For example, those holding the positions of trust, they also have a special role here. And our goal is to create attractive city. And actually regarding sustainability, the attractiveness might also be that we want to see the city as a platform to create new solutions, for example, for a more sustainable future. And of course, in the middle are the people. Without the people, with our residents, there's really nothing going on. And a bit of statistics, our people, the citizens of Espoo, over 50% of adult-aged people have university degree. So our people are educated. That can also be that they are a bit demanding, but they are also, in a recent study, it was said that our residents are keen to try new things, try new technological things, try new kind of approaches. So in that sense, we are in a very good position here in Espoo. The aim is really to create services together with our residents and clients. And in the previous presentation, I was glad to see as our school as a service model, because it's really groundbreaking, and it's something that we needed at that time, and still, because when we have mold problems, schools have to be, or the students have to be moved very fast from those not so healthy environments. And in that sense, this school as a service have been provided very, very good results. This is a kind of, I'm not really saying this, but I just wanted to kind of outline and emphasize the fact that some of our residents really feel that the city listens, but there is no dialogue. That the true ways to really have an effect on something that is going on is minimal. And in that sense, I just myself would like to see that the change from the listening phase to the true dialogue, and also from planning to true co-creation. And about the co-creation, I have some nice examples coming up. Then a bit about Sparks. As told, I work and I lead the work of what is happening in Espoo, the work package, which is developing Espoo especially. And but Sparks is really, it's not just about creating technologies. In this project, we are really aiming at citizen-centered planning, citizen-centered system, and still enabling the high quality of life. And in Sparks, we are doing the development in many areas. Main demo areas are Espoonlahti district and Lippulaiva blocks, and then another one is in Leppävaara. And actually, I somehow managed to delete the Leppävaara block, and then I realized that there is still something going on there as well. Because as I said, we have several citizen-centered actions towards sustainable city planning in this project. In Espoonlahti district, the Lippulaiva shopping center and the blocks are just being built. Kone, which is one of our partners in Sparks, has done very good research. It was mobile probing, where we get ideas about how residents, how their mobility behavior is, and very valuable information when we are planning new areas, new districts. Body classes and body families are really about getting together with our citizens, with our residents, and hearing them, but also kind of teaching and co-creating what sustainable lifestyle is and how we can kind of increase it. Also in Lippulaiva, there will be a new library, and the city is doing collaboration also with the sustainable development team of the city is participating in this. kind of how we could create the library. And actually, in a way, libraries are already sustainable lifestyle platforms, but how we could enhance this development, what more it could be. Then Kera area, like I said earlier, it's something very, very interesting, because I would call it a tabula rasa, empty painting in a way, because everything what is there will be demolished, and then it will be built again. And there will be residential like apartment buildings, but also some spaces for businesses, and plenty of things going on. But what I think is just to give the kind of what the size it is. If it's 15,000 people living in there, but of course the development is not happening tomorrow or next year. It will happen in the next 10 to 20 years. But in Kera, we are trying this new idea of creating a co-creation model, and of course we will do the co-creation model by co-creating with several stakeholders to create a co-creation model that is good for sustainable city development. And then once we are done with the Kera model for co-creation, we will scale it up to have kind of common model for the whole city. And in this co-creation model, the topics will mainly be energy, mobility, and land use, but these kind of in a mixed way. And from these, I can naturally jump to the characteristics of our city. Espoo is not city dense built all over. It's only the southern part that can be called a city in that sense. And instead of one city center, we have 5 city centers, and that's one part of the challenge here. Most of our city development and new buildings, new construction, it's well over 90%. I remember statistics from last year. They were built by rails or very good public transportation connections. So this is one part of how we try to build sustainable city. Always built by public transportation so that people have that choice there as well. What other characteristics the city has? Yes, we have this city, densely built city, but we also have village-like smaller city centers, village-like centers, and then we have really not remote area, but where buildings are built apart from each other, or there are only few buildings in a group. And when you think about sustainable city development, for me, of course, partly because of Sparks project, energy is the one of the key elements there. Energy is also a bit complicated because from what we have learned from a recent study from our residents of sustainability and how they could have their effect on sustainability in Espoo, energy comes in 4th place. And before that were topics like circular economy, sustainable food, and mobility. But when you think about where the CO2 emissions come from, the biggest kind of proportion is energy. And on 2nd spot there we have mobility. So I think we still have plenty to do when we are creating, when we are building the idea of energy citizenship, really, so that we could have active residents interested in how the energy is produced and even how they could trade it with other residents. I guess, and then now that I remember, the e-mobility hubs are one thing that we are creating also to support the sustainable lifestyle, but also kind of the part of the sustainable city planning picture. About the co-creating the co-creation model, it's really something that is only starting now, but what we have been kind of outlining here at the moment, it's really about recognizing the important stakeholders and their roles. One about the characteristics of Espoo, one thing is that we don't own the energy utility, so we have to collaborate with different kind of energy partners in this. And another one is that the city itself doesn't own too much land. So our hands are in a way, they're not tied, but we really have to negotiate with the landowners when we are developing the city. It's negotiating. It's not something that the city can just override or just tell what to do. It's really about negotiating. So stakeholders, the most important is of course the landowners, because without them we don't have the land where we want to build the sustainable city. But then of course we have the different service providers in energy, mobility, circular economy as well, how we really are able to build the sustainable city, and then of course the residents. And of course residents, not just the residents itself, but also associations related to residents. They are very good way to reach out to local groups of people. As I said, main themes are energy, mobility, and then the land use planning. So that if we get these three topics together, that would be a good start. Then we can add more blocks there, ideas, themes. But these are now the basis of the model. The schedules, I wrote the schedule because what I think is important, it's for every stakeholder is to know when is there a time to have an effect of a district development, how the process goes, what are the time frames, on which topics or which corners of the plan you are allowed to have your say at which point. Then of course the procedures, how the operational model is, how does it work really, and then of course I wrote the rules. I think it's one part of the openness really to have rules and also be open about the restrictions about the model and about the city development. It's not something that you can do every year or every day again and again. It's something that when you fix one plan or zoning, it's gonna be like that for a long time. So it's long-term planning. It's not something that can change from day to day or year to year right away. I'm not really sure if I'm making sense here at all, but at the end, what I always like to underline, it's really about the well-being of our residents, but also about global responsibility. It is something that is more than what is happening here in Espoo. Like I said, I'd like to see our city as a platform where good solutions, new solutions, sustainable solutions are developed, and then they can be exported around the world. In that way, our handprint, carbon handprint, for example, can be so much bigger, and Espoo as a city can have a very, very great effect also globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Elina. Really nice presentation, and also I especially liked this approach that you are co-creating the co-creation model. So really showing that you are open and transparent in the whole process, and as we all know, so Espoo is really one of the forerunners in this approach. How do you, since you have the experience from the city, so how do you see that? Has that been an easy journey? Because sometimes people want to prepare well in advance and kind of like then just show the ready final version and not really do that open preparation. So how do you see that in the city process? Has that been kind of like easy to make that type of process in the city level?
Of course, the process when, for example, in zoning, we have in Finland very strict legal process that you have to hear the residents and that stuff. But I really can't say that we are what I described here there yet. But I would like to see us going all the time towards that direction, so that our residents really believe and feel that they are being heard. And their aspects are taken into account. Of course, not every wish can come true. That's one part of this, but it's really trying to find the best solutions that also meet the requirements that are heard from our residents.
Yes, indeed, that's important. How do you see then? I mean, especially this kind of like, as you pointed out, so there are many angles of view and many perspectives and many preferences. So how you're actually combining those in a way that as you said, so you cannot always please everyone. So do you have sort of priorities? What are the most important for you and guiding your principles?
Yes, of course, those come from the plans that are approved by the city. I'm just losing my words. Not again, but anyway, the kind of the political structure of approving things. Of course, that's how things are outlined, and of course, you then have to stay inside kind of that. I'm not saying bubble, but inside those borders. Yes, but. Of course, what I didn't mention is that what I would like to see more is also the tools to support the collaboration between the citizens. We do have some good tools for that, but improve that so that also the planners would feel comfortable when confronting with the residents, so that it would be useful for both, so that it still needs improvement in that part as well. And then, of course, when planning the city, one aspect I didn't mention, now I'm seeing my notes, it's really the cost aspect. And that is one part, because, of course, we have to build affordable city also. That's one part. We can't really close out people from moving to Espoo because we are building too costly in a way.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's important that we have the affordable houses. That's true. There's the coming questions to you, Elina, now in the chat. There's one question about has the pandemic changed the co-creation engagement, and if so for the better or the first?
Of course, all the hearing is now online only, and I see here. I see bad things or dark clouds here, because of course when we work only digitally, we are not accessible in a way. We are not. How can we reach more people? And this is kind of the idea of hearing only the loudest ones. This is my own. I don't know if it's a common way of describing it, but it's really what I find very important. And of course in Sparks we are trying to kind of get into this point that how we can hear more people, more in a way more versatile group of people, and not just the loudest ones who are always telling their opinions out loud. We have to somehow find a way to reach to those who are not always there and who don't have maybe the time so much or have their life situation such that they are not able to participate in the current processes that we are providing.
Right. Yes. True. Important point. Then there is one question about these factors about to explain that the Espoo was really high in the European sustainable cities. So can you remember by heart that what were the main factors that contributed so high ranking?
So it was university in Netherlands that has done this study a couple of times already. And I remember that actually the factors changed from year to year as well, so they weren't the same. It was kind of developing also that process, how they measured the most sustainable city. But I believe that yes, greenery might be the one. We have fresh air still, so we don't have air pollution compared to some other cities in Europe, for example. But I think that one good point is the five city center structures. So that's really how we are able to build the cities sustainably, not just building around one center, but having five of them. I'm also trying to. I think there are many points in there that I'm not able to list at the moment. Of course, Espoo is one of the safest cities. We have the green parts, and then of course we can also kind of broaden the idea about education and social sustainability issues as well.
Right, that's true. I mean, it's a combination of many factors. True. Then one last question about the Espoo, as you were mentioning also, the Espoo has many centers, but also like that Espoo has villages which are not that close to the urban centers. So how the question is about how you include these and their people to your policies. So is that by digital tools or how do you try to reach them?
Yes, the digital tools is one part, but like I said, those local resident associations are one that we can have a collaboration and discussion with. I think, but that's also a bit controversial, since I've already now heard that in some areas in Espoo, there are residents that say that the resident association is not representing the idea of the whole area, but yes. You know how these things go, but of course the idea is to take different approaches to the area, because like I said, sometimes the resident association isn't the one that is it can't be the only one, but really having different ways to approach and hear them, at least. That's how I see it.
Right, good, thank you. There is also one comment about the digital services, that this is really good that we have the pandemic, that we are taking into account all the digitalization, and hopefully it won't go away now when the pandemic is going away. So we are really taking into account.
Can I say one more thing that is actually very significant here in Espoo? It has been now said that nearly 20% of our people living in the city are of foreign background. So they don't have Finnish or Swedish as their mother tongue. And this is actually also another aspect to the citizen engagement, and also the sustainable city planning, that how can we reach to those better?
Yes, true. Really good that you're pointing out. And of course, Espoo is not the only city who has the foreign, but many other cities as well. So it's really good that we include every citizens. Thank you for pointing out that. And thank you once more, Elina, for your excellent presentations. It was really inspiring. And I also want to thank Ken and Sophie for their excellent presentations as well. And now it's just kind of like my final conclusions. I want to just point you out that thank you once more for the excellent presentation, and please stay everyone tuned. You can see here the Sparks events. We are providing more and more this type of mini webinars and try to engage and show the new results. Also outside Sparks, as we today heard from what Sophie has done in the Tampere University and what Ken has done in the Aalto University. So really exchange the ideas between Sparks and other projects. So please stay tuned, and also you can have our Sparks newsletters where you have all the relevant information. So thank you once more, Sophie, Ken, and Elina, for contributing this event. And I wish you, and thank you, of course, everyone who is participating in the event. I mean, for your active contribution and questions and comments. And please stay tuned, and I wish you a pleasant day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.